In this video, I'm going to show you how to pick up stitches along the edge of your blanket, as well as how to get that first border edge started with a cast on of stitches. So if you take a look at your pattern, it tells you to cast on, I believe, 8 stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You're going to use your border color yarn, and just on the end of your circular needle tip, you're going to cast on 8 stitches. However you like to cast on. Okay, so I've got 8 stitches on there. You're gonna do that before you pick up any stitches. Okay, now using that same needle tip with the yarn and stitches attached to it, we're gonna start on one of the side edges. If this were your blanket, this would be your cast on edge. This would be the top, the bind off edge. We're gonna start on one of the long sides. Okay, so using that same needle tip, we're going to look for, what I look for, these, I almost call them knots. These little things right here are what I'm looking for when I'm picking up stitches. And I like to poke my needle tip right into the centers of them as I go. Your pattern asks you to pick up stitches at a rate of 3 stitches for every 4 blanket rows. And this is how I achieve that. So to pick up your first stitch, you insert your needle tip into that first little knot on the bottom edge. Sometimes it's a little tight. And then knit through it. Just kind of pull the yarn. Whoops, see, it's tight. Hang on, we'll get there. There we go, loosened it up. Okay, we knit through the blanket. And I'm going to go to the next knot. That was knot number 1. Here's knot number 2. Poke my needle tip right into the middle of it and knit through it. And knot number 3 is right here. Okay, now for stitch number 4, can you see right there is my next knot, and right here there's a little horizontal bar of yarn in between those 2 knots, the one that I was just in and the next one. And I'm going to insert just under that one little bit of yarn to pick up stitch number 4. And then I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 knots, and then stitch number 4 is going to be the little piece of yarn right in between them. So here we go. Here's number 1. What's most important when you're picking up stitches is that you go in at the same depth each time. Here's 2. I'll show you what I mean by that. So you see this nice consistent line of white up against my needle? That's what you're really going to see the most when you're looking at your fabric. So you don't want to ever interrupt that line or dip any deeper than that. So if on stitch number 3, if instead of going into the center of that knot, if I were to dip below it, see how that looks messy right there? And here's stitch number 4, if I were going to leave it. You see how it interrupted that line? It doesn't look as clean and neat going up the edge. So every few stitches, if you're new to picking up stitches like this, I would stop and look back and just make sure that you have that nice, clean, uninterrupted line. So I'm going to back up those 2 stitches out. Okay, so that was number 1. Here's number, I think, 2. And number 3 right into that knot. I might have gotten off on my count, but that's okay. Okay, number 4, the little bar right in between, right there. So I'm just going to progress the whole way up the side. So here's knot number 1. If you get off and you can't quite hit that ratio, that's okay. It's not a big deal. And if you can't quite find the perfect place to poke your needle tip, like if you can't identify one of those knots, that's also okay. Just what's most important is that you don't dip below this line that you're making. So wherever you can get your needle tip, that doesn't drop below it. Okay, see that? All the way up, nice and clean. Okay, so I'm just gonna go up to the top, and you wanna go the whole way up to the next corner of your blanket. Got a little piece there, there we go. So I'm gonna do the last one right in here. Okay, now you're ready to turn, and you're gonna knit your way back. That's what it looks like so far. You have this little overhang. What this overhang is gonna do, you're gonna knit back and forth for 15 rows, and when you're all done with that, let me knit 2 rows and I'll just talk you through it while I'm doing that. You're gonna work the border on this blanket one side edge at a time. You're gonna knit garter stitch if that's all you wanna do, or if you wanna add the little barnwood knots into the equation, you can do that. You don't have to though, they are completely optional. If you just want some simple garter stitch, don't want to think about it anymore, you can just knit. You don't have to do anything fancy. But I want to show you what it looks like on this first row when you get down to the bottom. Okay, so there's the last of my picked up stitches, and here are the beginning 8 that I cast on. You might see a little bit of a, like this gap here, that's totally fine. Just knit on past it. You'll tidy that up later when you sew this tiny little seam at the end. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to pretend that we have knit all 15 of those rows. I'm going to turn around. This will be row number 15, even though it was just row number 1. So your border now will stretch the whole way up to here. You'll have a garter stitch border along the long edge of your blanket. After row 15, you're going to start binding off. You don't want to bind off too tightly or too loosely. If you need to grab a needle that's one size larger to bind off, you can do that. You just don't want it too tight. You don't really want it too loose either, or it's going to ruffle. But if it's too tight, it's going to curve on you. And one thing I found when I was using this yarn in this batch was that when I got my first couple of border edges done, I didn't think they looked great. I thought they looked kind of terrible, actually, because they were really ruffly and flappy and just plain strange looking. But once I steam blocked them, and I talked about that in the pattern, at the end of the pattern, told you exactly what I did, they looked great. They kind of fluffed up. That yarn bloomed quite a bit. They laid nice and flat and even. I was very pleased with them when I was finished. So if you're not super happy with the way it looks at first, don't worry. It'll look better when you're done. Okay, getting up to the top. So you're going to bind off all of your stitches. Easier said than done, I guess. And then you're not going to cut your yarn when you get to the end. You're going to leave it live. And you're going to leave that last stitch live. Because what you'll do next is rotate your blanket. Almost there. 4 more to go. Okay, so if this were really your blanket, you'd have a much wider strip of gray running down the side. Okay, I only have this tiny little bit. But imagine that this border is a lot wider. You're going to leave this stitch attached. You're going to rotate your blanket so that you're looking at either the top or the bottom. It doesn't matter where you started. And then you're going to pick up stitches along this border edge and then continue picking up stitches along the top edge of your blanket. So here's stitch number 1. You're going to pick up 1 stitch per garter ridge. And since I only have 1 garter ridge on this sample piece, I'm just going to pick up 1 stitch into it. Now picking up along the cast on or bound off edge, it's different than on the sides because you have 1 stitch per stitch to pick up into. And you have a couple of different options on how to do that. You can either insert your needle tip under both parts of the stitch to knit. So I'll do 1 more of those. Or if you want to, and this is what I did with mine, I'll grab the blanket in just a second and show you what it looks like. Whoops, come on. Or you can just pick up under the back loop of that cast off stitch, whichever you like the looks of better, like that, just the back one. And it leaves a little bit of a ridge when you do it that way, which is kind of what I like, but you can do it however you like it. So here they are, the first 2 under both parts of the stitch. These were under just the back loop of the stitch. Grab the blanket here. So when you look, where'd you go? Here's the top edge of my blanket. That's what it looks like if you just pick up into that back loop. So you can decide what you like the looks of the best. And here, just as a little teaser for or preview for the next video, here's one of the little short row knots that I was talking about. So I'm going to talk about those and how to achieve those in the next video. So anyway, as you're working your border, you're going to work on the first 3 sides. You'll do the long, rotate it, pick up along the top, rotate it again, pick up down the other long edge, rotate it again, and pick up down along the bottom. The last stitch you pick up on that last edge is going to be right there next to this. Then you're going to finish this last piece and bind it off. And when you bind off, you should end up right here. You'll cut off your yarn, leave about a 10-inch tail, and then you'll just sew the side edge of the border that you just finished to this bottom edge of the very first part that you cast on. That's the only seam in this whole blanket, a little 2-inch seam. And then once you're done with that, you're going to weave in all your ends and block your blanket, and away you go. We'll see you in the next video.